Ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to all of you. We are going to start our session, the session on navigating geopolitical fault lines. What are India's options? The session deliberates on co-creating the future responsibly through various challenges on global economy. We welcome our esteemed panelists, His Excellency Ambassador Arun Singh, former Ambassador of India to US, Israel and France. His Excellency Ambassador Anil Wadhwa, former Ambassador of India to Italy, Thailand, Oman and Poland. Ms. Indrani Bagchi, CEO of Ananta Center. Mr. T.N. Ninan, former Editor, Business Standards, and Mr. T.V. Narendran, CEO and Managing Director, Tata Steels. Mr. Narendran, who is moderator of the session, may I request you to please take the session forward. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. We've decided as a panel that we're going to sit here and talk. I'd like to introduce Ambassador Arun Singh, who's a former ambassador of India to the US, Israel and France. Ambassador Anil Wadhwa, the former ambassador of India to Italy, San Marino, Thailand, Oman, Poland and Lithuania. Mr. Nayanan, who all of you would know, the former editor of Business Standard. Ms. Indrani Bagchi, the Chief Executive Officer of Ananta Center, friends from the media, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, a very warm welcome to what to me is a very important subject, which is navigating geopolitical fault lines and what are India's options. You know, geopolitics is become more and more relevant for all of us in industry. It's not just a matter of something that you debate over a dinner table, but something which impacts all of us for multiple reasons. You know, firstly, there are shifts in the global economy. The center of gravity of economic activity is shifting to the east. The world is dealing with rising powers, you know, moving from a unipolar world to a multipolar world. India is becoming more and more important, relevant, can't stay silent on many matters. India's voice and opinion is sought. Companies have become more and more entrenched in the global economy, either because of investors, joint ventures, or because of investments by Indian companies overseas. The general interconnectedness, you know, the interconnected world we operate in, global supply chains, you know, any of us who's in any kind of activity has some linkage with the global supply chain, either inward or outward. More recently, you're seeing the weaponization of policy, weaponization of currencies. So I think there's no underestimating the impact of geopolitical developments for us as industry, and I think hence the session is very, very important. So I'm going to invite each of our speakers to say a few words, and then we'll open it up for the questions and discussions going forward. Thank you very much. I'll now start with Ambassador Arun Kumar Singh and request him to say a few words.
Thank you very much. So we've been asked to discuss about issues related to geopolitical fault lines. And of course, it's been said that business is happy and is able to make money when it's a time of stability. But it's also been said that business can make more money at a time of instability if they are able to make the right calls. So I think the only thing we can say with certainty at this stage is that the next sometime, 5 years, 10 years or more, are going to be marked by tremendous uncertainty. And we all have to operate within that framework. If you look just at what the United States is doing, in fact, you are now hearing in the US talk of an industrial policy, something that they had advocated against for a long, long time when they were talking of globalization of trade and production. But now, for example, the US, through public and private investment, is expecting $3.5 trillion of investment to be done in the US as a follow-up to the Infrastructure Act, the CHIPS and Science Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act. Just in semiconductors, they have committed to spend $53 billion of state money, and already the private sector has committed more than $400 billion worth of investment in the semiconductors. So from the US, now we are talking of an industrial policy. And while earlier they had spoken about globalization of trade and production, efficiency in trade and production, now you hear talk of a trusted supply chain, a secure supply chain, reshoring of production. And as part of their competition with China, for example, they have now challenges they're handling in Europe, challenges they're handling in West Asia, but they still say that their primary economic, technological, military challenge is the challenge from China. And that China is the only country globally with the intent and capability to replace the US in the international system. So in terms of the challenge that they are seeing from China, the kind of technology restrictions that have been put in place, not allowing China access to the more advanced semiconductors or machines for making semiconductors. And in a very unusual manner, not only are they getting more restrictive in terms of Chinese investments and acquisitions in the US, but are looking potentially at regulations to bar US companies from investing in high technology in China. There is talk now of bringing in regulation to prevent China access to cloud computing that is available with US companies. So that's one dimension of the challenge that is playing out. And we have to then see how does China react to that. And many have said that you have to almost get into a game theory kind of scenario, that with action, reaction, which is the way this is going to play out. And of course, there is a bit of pushback in the US system from business, because a lot of business which has invested in China, which sees short-term profits coming out of China, doesn't want to give up on that opportunity, whatever be the longer-term strategic challenge. For example, one US company in semiconductors lobbied very heavily with the US administration and Congress not to allow some of the newer restrictions. And they said publicly that 28% of their revenue comes from sales to China. And if they don't do the sales to China, they cannot spend the $4 billion worth of investment they're doing in R&D to stay ahead of the game. So that's the kind of dilemma they're facing. But I think from the government, from the policy community, from Congress, the message is very clear. China is a challenge, potentially a national security challenge, and from the national security perspective, now the US has to respond differently. So they moved away from the talk of decoupling, but they're talking now of de-risking. So that's the word we hear from the US. And from the China side, you hear now about self-sufficiency in production, because they also want to de-risk in their own way. So that's the US-China dimension. And simultaneously, you see the Europe-China dimension playing out. Because so far, Europe had concentrated largely on trade and economic issues related to China and had allowed the US to take the lead on security issues and to handle the strategic challenge from China. But now, US says that they also need to step up with this game, and there are divisions in Europe. President Xi, when he visited Europe recently, of course, he went to France, but then he went to Hungary, to Serbia, to show that there are different viewpoints. When the German Chancellor visited China recently, he did not raise many issues related to excess capacity in China, something that the European Commission has been doing. And the European Commission, which has competence in trade, is able to do that because the Chinese cannot target European Commission specifically, like they've earlier targeted Lithuania, for example. Because if they apply anything against the European Commission, it will apply to all European countries or EU member countries. So European Commission is able to take a stronger position, and they have been doing advocacy for coming in with tariffs against Chinese electric vehicles. So we have to see how that dynamic plays out, and there's a certain amount of uncertainty related to that, because today, 15% of Europe's trade is with China, 20% of their imports are from China, and for the German automobile companies, for example, the Chinese market is a very important market. And the third dimension of uncertainty that we see is related to the situation in West Asia, because it's very difficult to predict how this situation will play out at a time when the objective that Israel has set for itself of eliminating Hamas could be difficult. Others say that they will engage now or re-engage the Arab countries with Israel if they start looking at a two-state solution, which the Israeli political system is not able to accept at this point of time. So if we don't see an easy way out of the situation in West Asia, what does it mean for the India, Middle East, Europe corridor? What does it mean for I2U2? What does it mean for integrating Israel within the region as was being attempted through the Abraham Accords? So that's the third important element of instability in coming. And finally, the Russia-China equation, which matters a lot for us, because 30% of Russia's exports today are to China, 40% of their imports are from China. And India has to work to ensure that Russia does not go over to China, at least as far as India-China issues are concerned. So what is the kind of economic relationships that we can build or sustain with Russia at a time where we are doing our own de-risking from China, keeping in mind the national security and other aspects? So these are the dimensions playing out. And I think, as I said, we should all accept that the period ahead would be of uncertainty about opportunities, uncertainty about challenges, and we have to weave our way through this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So just a question before I move on to the other speakers. So do you see, the world which was easier to deal with when you had two blocks to a world where it's different countries are aligned together for depending on different issues? There's no permanent alignment depending on the issue. So how do you think India should then deal with that situation? I know that's how we've been playing it out as well, but how do you see that impacting in the context of industry?
So I think industry will have to see the opportunities where they are. And I think one of the areas, we have certain advantages. One is, of course, our advantage in terms of human resource capability, because we hear about different countries where the availability of skilled workers is challenged. And you see the global capability centers that are coming up in India. So human resource capability gives us an advantage. I think the other area we should look at, as attempt is certainly being made, is in the area of critical and emerging technologies. Because those are the areas where partnerships have not been built. And so in those areas, by doing joint work related to technology development or our own work related to technology development, based on that, what is the new kind of production sharing that we are able to work out? And with that kind of production sharing, what kind of trade facilitation should be done to enable that? So I think that would probably be the way to go ahead. And I see that is the reason, for example, because of which India has done the agreement with US on critical and emerging technologies. And also now there is a India-US ROK agreement on trying to work together on critical and emerging technologies. And many other countries have now shown interest in working with India in the area of critical and emerging technologies. So those, since they are going to determine the change patterns of production and trade, perhaps that's one area to focus on.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Singh. Ambassador Wadhwa, for your comments.
Thank you very much. I think we've heard a lot about the uncertainties which prevail today in the world, so I'm not going to delve into that. But I'm going to talk more about what India should be doing to actually take care of a situation in which we find ourselves. First of all, diversification of trade is extremely important, as we all know. And it's just, finding new markets like Africa, for instance, and also consolidation in places like Southeast Asia, which has to be pursued in real earnest. But we need much more investments into the domestic industry. The government is on the right path, has created the right policies. You have a PLI scheme, but that actually needs to be monitored, tweaked as we go along, and to make sure that manufacturing is in the areas that India actually needs. And it's also an encouragement for others who are outside looking at India on how they can be encouraged to come and actually invest in the areas which are mutually beneficial. I think we need more bodies like Invest India. We need more replication of that in state governments, for instance, because one of the common complaints of foreign investors always is that India is a difficult place to navigate. And therefore, taking the cue from many other countries that I've been in, I think it's most important that you have much more boots on the ground to take care of that situation. Secondly, our engagement with the region and resilient supply chains. Now, of course, India has very poor global value chains. If you look at Southeast Asia, for instance, and staying out of RCEP, in my view, should be reviewed occasionally, in fact, much more often than before, because after all, what is an Act East policy without having an engagement which is commensurate with what you say? So economics is the heart of this engagement of the Act East policy, but if you are staying out the RCEP, an agreement like RCEP, then obviously you are not engaged fully with the region. So I would actually advocate that should happen much better. And we have a resilient supply chains initiative, which we've signed with Australia and Japan, but it has yet to see successes on the ground after many years have passed. So again, that is something that we have to build into whatever engagement we have with prominent countries in the region, especially with the Quad countries. The other point I wanted to emphasize was on our energy security. Now here again, because of the mounting export bills that we have to make sure that we have alternatives, that we look at other places from where we can buy our energy, and also cut down on how much we buy. So that means more exploration domestically, more production, upping that production and bringing down the bills for imports of energy. Also going into renewables and diversification is much more important. One important area which has emerged for India in this situation is our defense manufacturing. If you look at the performance of defense-related industries, especially those who are from the private sector, they're doing quite well. And I have full faith that this industry would do much better going forward because of the involvement that we have now of the private sector. And taking it away from the monopolies of the public sector, which was the case so far. The next point is about multilateralism. Now here again, India has been trying to see how we can strengthen the WTO. We look at the United Nations as an institution to fall back upon, to create the rules and to implement them. But we've seen over the past few years that multilateralism has generally failed to deliver. So we have to rely on bilateralism, we have to rely on plurilateralism, come together in groupings, and look at new FTAs that we can sign. Many of them are on the anvil, but it's more important to actually be able to implement the FTAs on the ground. One of the biggest lacuna that I feel is the consultation process with the industry, which should be much more than it has been before. involvement of the industry in the FTAs, and at the same time making sure that the procedures which we implement after the FTA has been signed is simplified to the extent that industry actually feels the need to take advantage of whatever has been signed, and they have the requisite knowledge to do so. Finally, the promotion of sustainable development in India. Now, that is to be done in many ways. One of them is, of course, energy. But I would say that you also have an infrastructure requirement which is crying out for some sort of a direction, because when you have sustainable infrastructure development, then that means that you are progressing in a way which you can sustain over the years. And it's not just in energy sector, but also in terms of the materials that you use, the new technologies that you adopt, and encouraging industry to adopt to sustainable technologies going forward. Finally, everybody knows economic reforms are in India. Land, capital, labor are at the top of the list. So we have to proceed in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Wadhwa. Just a follow-up question. You mentioned Africa at the beginning of what you said. Many people don't realize that out of the 4 billion people going to get added to the planet this century, 3 billion are going to be in Africa. So, it's potentially a huge opportunity for India, particularly given that a lot of the Indian diaspora has been there for a long time. So do you have any comments on that? Because again, as industry, what is it that we should be better prepared for?
So I think with Africa, we have very strong linkages, as you said, because of the diaspora connection that we have. And we've been working with Africa for a very long period of time in development cooperation. So it's got a solid basis of cooperation, and Indian companies are generally trusted. The pattern has been such that if you go to any African country, you're not looked upon as somebody who's a predator, who's going to exploit you, and that is a plus point for the Indian industry. And the fact you mentioned that Africa is going to have adding to the population going forward, their needs are going to grow, and that is why Africa as a continent becomes much, much more important than it has been before.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Wadhwa. Now we have Mr. Nayanan. We were just telling him before the session that we are missing his weekend ruminations, so we've got him on a Saturday, so looking forward to hearing your thoughts.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Navigating geopolitical fault lines and India's options, I think it works to India's interest if the world moves to a multipolar reality. That's the first proposition. The second proposition is that in the contest between the West and what might be called the rest, it seems to me that the balance of power is shifting to the rest and away from the rest. At a time when we are primarily aligned increasingly with the West, or the nominal West in the sense of the Quad countries, plus of course the US, Europe. Our people, our businesses, all of them are oriented towards the West. But as Mao said, the east wind will prevail over the west wind. So if you look at the east wind, it's primarily a question of China. And we have a problem because we have a border issue. We have a problem with China coming into the Indian Ocean and our own region. So this is primarily an adversarial relationship which we have to manage to the best of our ability. But what we're losing out is that East Asia is the most dynamic region now in the world. And having chosen to stay out of RCEP, we are fundamentally getting locked out of all the supply chains as the East Asian economies integrate much more with China. I mean, the US may want to block Chinese exports, but Chinese exports to East Asia are growing. They are investing in East Asian countries, Vietnam and elsewhere. So, and we are not really into that game. And we are much more into the Atmanirbhar strategy of import substitution with some export thrust, but primarily you want to make the pharmaceutical intermediates here, you want to make the electronic stuff here, and so on. So in that game, the principal objective of building our manufacturing sector, which we have not managed to do, the question is whether this strategy is the right strategy to adopt in this evolving situation where the East, focused around China, is growing in stature and power and capability. And the Western attempt to box in China will fail, because the Chinese already are dominant in all the clean energy sectors. They've taken leadership, I think, in the life sciences and the biopharma area. They've certainly made breakthroughs in all the defense and space technologies. Their fourth aircraft carrier is going to be probably nuclear powered, and so on. So they've broken through the technology barriers, and now to try and shut them in, hem them in, or close Western markets to them, the Chinese will export to all the other markets. So I think we have very capable diplomats, but they can only do what your domestic strengths allow you to do. And so primarily you have to ask yourself, is this manufacturing strategy the right strategy? Everybody talks about Chinese subsidies and the way they promote those, and now the rest of the world is trying to copy China, what they think China did. Subsidies, tariff walls, we're doing it, the US has just done it, Europe will do less of it, but they will also do some of it. But what we forget is that if China is dominant in electric vehicles, they have 139 companies producing electric vehicles. It is a bitterly competitive market. They are super efficient. And their markets are competitive in all the other areas which they're globally dominant in. So I think we should focus on how to make our markets as competitive and as efficient, and our companies therefore able to export and become competitive as part of global supply chains. So there is a strategy issue here which I think we're missing. For the rest of it, the economy will continue to grow well. So our role in the world and our ability to speak to the world, all of that will improve. So these are not areas so I'm focusing on the one critical issue that I think we haven't got right. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Nigel. In fact, I think as industry, I think all of us are committed to becoming globally efficient, and oftentimes, and that's what CII takes up all the time, there's only that much efficiency you can drive within a factory gate, but there's a lot of inefficiency which comes from outside the factory gate. So when we look at the ease of doing business and the time taken to do stuff and the cost of doing business, a lot of it creeps in from outside, and it's not necessarily something which can only be solved at the center. So oftentimes it's the state or the local district which is part of the problem, So I think this is where, I guess, as industry associations and the government, we need to work together. Because honestly, what's happening, and which is why I want your comment, you have a trade policy, you have an industrial policy. We all debate capital flows across borders, trade flows across borders, but people don't flow across borders, right? And for countries like ours where you need jobs, then where is that trade-off? Because ultimately, the issue becomes, how do you create jobs?
Yeah. No, I completely take your point on the supporting infrastructure, and we're doing a lot to deal with that. The whole transport infrastructure sector. We've improved our rankings on the logistical index. The economy's growth in development is showing up in the complexity index, where too we've improved our rankings. So it's not that nothing is happening, but we're still not getting the primary objective of raising the share of manufacturing in GDP. This was a target set in 2012 for 2022, that we would get 25% of manufacturing to be GDP, in GDP. But in 2024, we are still where we were in 2012. So something's missing.
Thanks. Thank you. Ms. Bagchi, you've been a journalist and you're running the Aspen Center. Looking forward to your thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Narendran, and thank you, CII. As you look at the world today, my view, technology is geopolitics, geopolitics is technology, and that's going to intensify as we go along. There are three areas that I thought we should look at when we look at how we will be navigating the fault lines in geopolitics, because the fault lines that are coming down the road may not be the fault lines that we are already familiar with. First, is artificial intelligence and the governance of technology, the governance of artificial AI. This is something India should be very, very interested in, because India stands to be one of the biggest beneficiaries of the AI revolution that is currently sweeping the world. We generate about 20% of global data, not to speak of innovation, the future, of whether we can use AI for all, whether we can use AI for public good, for defense. A lot of it is the opportunity that most of us have not actually conceptualized. But I think we do need to pay attention to that. Second, where geopolitics is interfering and will interfere in our daily lives. Communications, technology, and submarine cables. We don't look at these areas, but there is a serious geopolitical war going on at the ocean floor. Just to give you a sense, from '94 onwards, since the time subsea cables have controlled data flows, have controlled communication flows in the world, most of them have gone through China. From 2020, that has changed. From 2025, the big companies that actually lay those cables, from Google to Meta to Amazon, will not be going via China. If you look at it, just last month, I think Google put in about $1 billion to run subsea cables from Japan to Hawaii. These are not high traffic. So security is dominating economic choices, not only by governments, but also by companies. Why is this important? Because without us taking a look deep, deep below the ocean, tomorrow, a country like India, which we want to be a leader in technology, in communications, the world would look very different if subsea cables are not around this country. The third is critical minerals. We've talked about EVs, we've talked about future manufacturing. None of them will go anywhere if you don't have access to critical minerals, all of which is now determined by geopolitics. I'm sure you have all seen, and some of you may have felt the difference when China took retaliatory measures against the US by banning the export of the 3Gs, gallium, germanium, and graphite, high-end graphite, all of which will affect the EV industry. The question that we should be asking ourselves is, how much can we support India's own critical minerals future? Where is it that we should be looking? And I think this is something that, this is an area of geopolitics that we should be looking at together, both industry and government. What is India doing and what should India be doing? I'd say one of the first things that we should be pushing for is tying up with countries that work on subsea cables, which go through India. I think we've already begun the process. Let us not spend too much energy on trying to get into the UN Security Council. Frankly, that's not going to go very far. Much better that if we pushed towards greater membership of a little-known organization called the Mineral Security Partnership, a group of 14 countries invested in accessing critical minerals around the world. 3, plurilateral organizations like the Quad, Because if you look carefully at what the Quad does, most of what it is doing is actually setting the rules of the road for technology governance of the future. We should be pushing to be in the room for those discussions, because all of those decisions will impact India more than anybody else. For IMEC, this is the India-Middle East corridor. We have Gaza. That war is on, and as Ambassador Singh pointed out, it's not going anywhere. There is no solution in sight. But for many of us who follow these things like junkies, like we do, India's signed up for what is called the Combined Maritime Force 53, the CMF 53, which has been doing super work in securing the sea lanes in the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aden, and the Straits of Hormuz. Very important sea lanes of not just communication, but energy security for India. We don't see so many Chinese warships there, which is basically India making itself a net security provider in that part of the world, a part of the world which is crucial for India. If you also look at IMEC, you notice that the countries in IMEC to the east of Israel, Gaza, remain as committed to it today as they were before, which basically means that the eastern corridor of IMEC is still in play and deserves a lot more attention from India. Because again, India is one of the biggest, this is one of India's biggest markets. It is also, India becomes one of its biggest sources. There are areas that we will be looking at in future which will impact India's security in a way that traditional security were not, traditional security arguments do not work anymore. Security means very different things in the 21st century, and I suspect we will be looking at it very differently from now on.
Thank you so much. I'm going to pick on one point that you made on critical minerals, So while I think there's a lot of work going on looking at what are those critical minerals in India, and I know that the government has announced, a lot of auctions on that. But another area which probably is for us to work on is on the recycling policies, because we are going to be a big consumer of anything which has critical minerals. So if you don't have it geologically, how do we pick it out of what we consume?
So my sense is, something like critical minerals, we cannot take a linear view. We would have to be in the space of both acquisitions of not just minerals, but acquisitions of processing technology, acquisitions of recycling technology as well. But also, I think the important thing for us is to look for the opportunity spaces within the geopolitical fault lines that have been built up. For instance, if Biden's 100% tariffs on Chinese EVs, does that open up space? And I suspect it does. How does that work for India? Because these are geopolitical decisions. They may be economic decisions, but they're actually geopolitical decisions that we can make. So I think there's a world there that we should be looking at very differently than what we did.
Thank you. I'm going to open up for questions, Vinayak. And I'm also saying the panelists can ask each other questions if they're interested. Yeah, Vinayak. Can someone give a microphone to Vinayak?
So I have a question for both the ambassadors. See, with all that we have heard and the challenges, for long there has been a debate about the Indian Foreign Service. And it's an uncomfortable question. Indian industry has always advocated a mind shift in the Indian Foreign Service from the traditional moorings and bearings of political diplomacy to economic diplomacy. That our missions, our embassies get far more attuned to address the business challenges that the country faces. Many of them have been discussed, all the fault lines. So the question to both of you, now that you're both outside the box and not line managers in the Foreign Service anymore, do you perceive the Indian Foreign Service to be contributing to the extent of addressing all these issues and shifting the focus from political diplomacy to a far higher weightage on economic diplomacy?
Okay, so let me go first because it's a difficult question. But I think, as far as the focus is concerned, it has shifted dramatically in favor of focus on economic diplomacy. And I can say that with experience over the past decade or so, because, I was actively involved with economic diplomacy, especially after we re-established our diplomatic relations on an even keel with Italy. So we had a spate of, delegations both ways, precisely because it was a different India at that point in time. The India that is looking at opportunities abroad, it is also looking at ways in which you can get high technology into India in sectors which are needed, and much needed investment. What I said earlier about when I was speaking was, what we need to do internally in terms of making sure that whatever comes in is guided and is also directed in a better manner. And also that we utilize the free trade agreements that we have in a better manner. I don't think there's any lack of effort on the part of the missions to do that. Because of that change in orientation, maybe you need more efforts there again. And I think as we go along, that orientation is changing quite fast because it's no longer the olden days where you used to write dispatches or telegrams on political issues. They no longer matter because the world is interconnected. It's much more instant. And from social media, you can pick up anything nowadays. So that part of diplomacy is behind us, I would say, and the future is going to be more and more economic. And I think India is also orienting itself in that direction.
Vinayak, just to add what Anil said, I think the change has happened, and change happened a long time ago. And in all the work that we do, there is tremendous focus on economic diplomacy, trade, and various aspects. And you can ask various CII and other delegations that go abroad. I think the support they get from the embassies, not just during the visit, but in terms of conceptualizing what should be done, I think it's reasonably significant. And for example, recently I was involved in this initiative that has emerged for India-US cooperation on critical and emerging technologies. And earlier, the cooperation in science that was done with different countries was from the perspective of science. There was a diplomatic spin-off. In this particular instance, diplomacy, national security played a very important role in conceptualizing what should be done and then pushing it forward to seeing that as a major way of consolidating political relations, consolidating national security for India. So I think that change has happened. People in the government, in the Ministry of External Affairs, as I see it from outside, in the embassies, look at trade, technology, investments as a very critical part of consolidating the overall relationship.
Thank you. In fact, I do vouch for that because we've seen a change in the way the Indian offices, foreign offices work with us in multiple countries that we invested in, very proactively reaching out to us and engaging with us, particularly when we are having a lot of local issues that we're dealing with. I appreciate that. Any other questions from the audience? Yeah, yes, please.
Let me introduce myself. So Venkat from CMD of Eastern Advanced Technology, Chennai. We are the biofuel business. I'm also a member in the Niti Aayog Technical Committee. The point I want to ask all of you is, we are talking about geopolitical, political. Days are gone when people are fighting over a border issue and everything. I think it's going to be more technological, and all of you have discussed that. So the energy security, according to me, is most important. Even though on the both sides of the thing, coal gasification as a biofuel, I still think energy security, we should try to cut down as much of import of energy. I think that's going to be the biggest challenge, especially we are now importing a lot of energy from the Middle East and other thing. So I want the panelists to tell me what steps the government is taking. I can see we are also working with steel industry, JSP and others. So we are taking decarbonization in the steel industry. That's another point. So let us not overstress on the climate issue. Like China, we take a leaf out of them. Try to see how to secure energy security.
Thank you. Mr. Nayan, anyone? Yeah. The question is, how do you work on energy security? What is it that we need to do more?
So I think when you spoke about the biofuels, India signed the Global Biofuel Alliance last year, and I think Brazil has taken the lead as the major biofuel exporter in the world. But on renewable energy, and I think renewable energy will remain a part of our energy mix for a very, very long time to come. For energy security, I mean, we've taken a beating from every Western country for the last 2 years for importing Russian oil at cheaper rates. But, you need the oil, you need it at an affordable rate, and so you get it. And I think those battles will continue because the wars will continue. Today it's the Russia-Ukraine war. Tomorrow it'll be something else. But even in the renewable energy space, I think there are other issues in contention, quite apart from whether we can do biofuels or whether we can do wind and solar. And I think every one of those sectors come up with their own challenges. For instance, the question of green hydrogen, what defines it? The definition of green hydrogen itself should be a geopolitical question. But yes, I think we've all taken that into account.
I just wanted to add something to what Indrani has said. I think what we need is diversification of energy. And that is quite apparent because today you can't just rely on fossil fuels, and India is one of those few countries who still have not been able to make a determination about coal, for instance, the exact time frame. So that transition is happening, but it has to happen in a manner that is sustainable and it is good for the economy as well. Now, earlier on we were talking about critical minerals and what we need for transition into the new economy, the green economy. So we have supplies of things like lithium, cobalt, nickel, etc., and rare earths. I think India has started off a little late in that because the world started off a little earlier. But it's good that we've started off now because that realization has to happen by way of putting into place actual procedures for procurement and ensuring that supplies are ensured for the future. So whether we acquire assets abroad or we strengthen our own, deepen our mining reforms and get others to come in and prospect in India and make it much more attractive, because I think what is lacking is the attraction of other companies, especially those who are outside and also those who work in consortia in India, to find it much more attractive to come here and to prospect and then to benefit in the process. So that's what is required.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Yes, please.
So let me introduce myself. I'm Abhishek Bhatt. I work with a boutique startup called Consortia Advisory. We do policy advocacy. So my question is, most of the policies that we see, which are being framed in Government of India or any of the policies, there's a big role that MBBs and Big Fours play. Can there be a way forward? We talk about Make in India for MSME. We talk about for Make in India in different contexts and contours. But Make in India in the context of consulting firms is still very limited. And these Big Fours, to be very honest, most of them are American, and they have a huge heft in terms of defining the contours of policy. So I just wanted to pick your thoughts on that.
Mr. Nayan, you want to take that? The question is, we have a lot of Make in India discussion around manufacturing, etc. He's saying for consulting firms, a lot of consulting firms operating in India from elsewhere. Can we have some sort of policy or any thoughts around how to encourage local consulting firms? Is that a way to put it? Yeah, yeah.
But as far as I know, the global consulting firms are here.
No, he's saying, why not more Indian origin consulting firms, and what can we do to encourage that?
I mean, if you have to set up consulting firms that will compete with McKinsey and Bain and all the others, I think that will be a long time coming. I think there are more important things to do domestically.
So my view is that we should pick niche areas where the contextual experience is very relevant, and I think that's where maybe there's an opportunity, as Mr. Nainan says, trying to take on the biggest and the best in the world. Maybe step 2, step 1 should be to create our own niches, and I think Vinayak is missing. Vinayak is a good example of starting something which was relevant for India.
I'll also say that this business of big management consulting firms is a peculiarly US phenomenon. You don't find it in Japan or Germany or, or China for that matter. So it's a very American thing linked to the whole MBA phenomenon that exists in the US, which is not so much there in the European continent or Japan and China. So that's part of a certain kind of ecosystem, which is different from
Ambassador Singh.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, and if you just look at these consulting firms, globally of course, including in the US, a large number of people working for them are Indians. And a lot of the back-end work is being done in India. So it's now a question of building your own independent capacity. So I think some effort has to be made, and somebody has to be willing to put in that effort, capital, train the human resource, and then you have to get the political heft for countries outside India to look at Indian firms to be able to provide consultancy of that nature. And for that, there has to be much deeper integration with the international economy.
And to some extent, IT majors are good examples of Indian-grown firms who are, in some sense, consulting. Yeah. Last question, yeah, because we are running out of time.
Excuse me.
Thank you, sir. Yeah. I have one quick question for Mr. Nainan. Mr. Nainan, you mentioned this about the RCEP, and it appeared to me at least that from your point of view, we should have signed the RCEP. We made a miss there. I'd like to sort of counter that a little bit as an SME businessman in India. My view is that on any sector where we have gone to zero duty, and I come from the electronics sector, I chair the National Committee for Electronics at CII, we have not been able to compete with China at all. And in the area that was often now talked about, mobile phones, it's come because we have a 20% duty on the one hand and a fantastic PLI on the other. So the carrot and stick has worked. Now, if we were to do the same for any other sector, automobile, steel, for example, in the industry we did this vote around. I don't think the industry feels, on the one hand, that with an RCEP kind of thing, we would have been able to export anything to China because their tariff, non-tariff measures are so strong, they will not allow access to their markets with whatever. On the other hand, wherever we opened up our doors to China, we have seen that we have lost out. So in this kind of an environment where we are not genuinely competitive, whether it is because of their government support or because we didn't have support for so long, maybe it's too early for us to really open up doors and do an FTA with someone like China, which in my opinion is what RCEP was all about.
I understand the problem, but I'm usually nervous about a situation where 15 major economies in Asia are all on one side, and we are the solitary large economy in Asia which is outside that net. Then you can't say something's wrong with those 15 and we are the guys who are right. I think there's a problem with that proposition. Second, your own neighbors, both Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, are now lining up to want to get into RCEP. So what is this that's special about our industry that we need to be protected, but nobody else seems to think they need that protection? I think then we need to ask ourselves some questions.
Sure.
Sir, one
So
last question.
I kind of relate with what you asked, and I think we can have a debate because there are obviously multiple views. Mr. Leiter, I think the biggest success story in manufacturing in India, in my view, has been automobile so far. Auto. And the question is, if you had zero import duty on cars in 1990, would you have had an auto industry? I think that's the question. The point is, not only did the auto industry grow, what was done is you opened up so that anyone could set up a car plant in India. You didn't need a joint venture partner. Investment was 100% you could have. Auto industry created an ecosystem, and today you have an auto component industry which is so strong, they can compete with anyone in the world. So the question is, it's a chicken and eggs, if you protect, how long do you protect? And how do you, at the end of it, have a competitive industry? And it is not that forever you're dependent on protection. So I think that's the debate. And I can fully understand where he's coming from, because electronics manufacturing is going through that thing. But I think it's a point which obviously we need to think about as CII, because even in CII we have multiple members. Some are producers, some are consumers of inputs, intermediate. So we don't have, I think, unequivocal view, because there are multiple points of view on this. Thank you. Yeah. Ms. Ambassador Vadra, you want to say something?
I think what we need to do is to keep this under review, because as I said earlier, if you want a strong relationship with Southeast Asia and ASEAN in particular, you've got to create supply chains. And to do that, unless you're economically engaged through a mechanism like RCEP, it's very difficult to do that. And of course, you can argue that we have individual free trade agreements, etc., with most of these countries. But it's not the same thing, because others who are joining RCEP are doing so because looking at a larger market of countries. And India is out of that. So while I take the point that there is some amount of caution which is required, but this should be constantly under review in future. Thank you.
So I'm going to stop here because, sorry, one more question, last question.
Thank you very much.
There's lunch waiting somewhere else, so I don't want to lose the audience.
So my name is Dr. Harish Ahuja. I'm from National Stock Exchange. My question is a general question. I think the conclusion which is emerging from this particular session is the multipolar world is good. Localization of be it supply chain or value chain is good. Every country should make their own technology stake, or for that matter, mineral resources or renewable sources supply. But we are moving away slightly away from the economic efficiency law, where the global trade of people, man, material leads to economic efficiency. This localization of value chain, be it in the renewable space or mineral space, or be it in manufacturing, ultimately increase the cost, and it has impact on the interest cost and ultimately impact on the depreciation of the currency, which is happening, but RBI is keeping it slightly high. My question is very specific to this particular conclusion. This multipolar world is good. At this stage, when India has good population, good number of consumers, we can absorb it. But the West, which has all the financial powers, and now they're creating the depth in terms of AI infrastructure.
Can we get to the question, please?
My question is, what is the strategy forward? I think we can be the next China, and we can be targeted by West much earlier than China was done. So this creation of capabilities in-house has its own cost in terms of high interest rate, high inflation, high expenditure. How will you cope up in the future when West will be against us? How actually we are working on this?
Well, first, one, how do you know that the West will be against us? So it's a matter of speculation. Now, second, some have said like they've turned against China. There was a reaction to Japan in the 1980s. So if they see India as a challenge, that'll probably emerge only after India becomes, let's say, a $20 trillion economy. Well, let's first become a $20 trillion economy and then see how we manage that relationship. Europe, the overall GDP of Europe is broadly the same as the United States. And the United States has not quite turned against Europe. So there are ways of managing relationships that people see it in their own advantage to do the partnership. And today, for example, if the US wants to do a partnership with India, aside from other factors, is because they see it in their own interest to do this partnership. If they are facing the challenge from China, then the partnership with India's human capital is vital for them to maintain their global lead in innovation, including in the challenge from China. So we have to manage relationships in a way. So I think there's nothing inevitable about the West seeing India as adversarial. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know we've run out of time. I must thank you, the audience, and thank the panelists, Ambassador Singh, Ambassador Wadhwa, Mr. Nainan, Ms. Bagchi. I think the conversation has highlighted the relevance and importance of the geopolitical environment, the fact that it's going to impact all of us, whether we are in government or in industry. There's no straight line in the future. It's going to be a complicated path ahead, and we need to build resilience and competitiveness as industry to really succeed and survive. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you, speakers. That was an indeed insightful session. Before we close, may I request Mr. Narendran to please give a token of appreciation to all speakers. And also, may I request Ms. Bagchi to hand over the token of appreciation to Mr. Narendran. Ms. Bagchi, may we request you to? Ladies and gentlemen, we come to a close of this session. Thank you. Please join us for the lunch and look forward to your continued presence in the subsequent sessions. Thank you.